Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Sendra D, where we dive deeply and help you wake up to the essence of what it means to live a real, authentic, affluent life. Beyond the balance sheets, the bank accounts, the private jets, the political offices, into the realm of inner wealth and personal power. I'm Sendra D, your companion guide on this trajectory of truthful self-mastery as we celebrate your individuality and your sovereignty. All right, we're back with another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. As you can see, I haven't even changed my clothes. Robin's still wearing the same thing. We're just recording back to back. Full transparency, as I try to be a very ethical and honest mediator. So on the last episode, we discussed the process of mediation, the effectiveness of mediation, why mediation and not litigation. But today, again, I have with me Robin Caral Shaw, who is an attorney, mediator, and trainer, who is so kind in indulging me because I'm enjoying this conversation to do another segment. And we did the micro. So now we're going to do the macro. But before we do that, Robin, can you tell the audience a little bit more about who you are for those who didn't listen to the last episode?
Thank you, Sendra. I'm a native New Yorker. I spent quite a bit of time growing up in New York, absorbing everything New York. I started law school in New York at Fordham, and I was with a Washington, D.C. law firm. So they switched me to Washington. So I spent several years in Washington learning how the government works and in some ways doesn't work. But as Sendra knows from living all those years in DC, it was very interesting. Then I went international corporate with a Fortune 100 company. And then I came down to Florida and raised my son down here. I became a mediator in 1998 and also took the Florida and was accepted in the Florida bar in 1988 as well. Having practiced law in Washington, D.C. and in Pennsylvania before that. So that brings us to where we are.
Well, thank you so much. And I enjoy listening to your background. There's always a little piece that you add. You added a little piece this time that you didn't add last time. But thank you so much. So, of course, I enjoy speaking to like-minded people, and we are in the same field. The only difference, I do not have a law degree. I come from a family of attorneys, and so it's always an experience for me to speak to attorneys, to check in to see, should I have gone to law school instead? But no, I like what I did. I mean, I have the MBA and I have the Master's in Conflict Analysis and Resolution. So I wanted to bring Robin back to open up the conversation to not just the local. When I say local, we've been speaking about Florida in the United States, to take it abroad, because I know, Robin, that your background is, your family is from Ukraine, but you're also Jewish. So I said, my goodness, how many Jewish, people with Jewish and Ukrainian heritage have I met? Probably none other than you. So I thought we would give the audience sort of a direct view at what that was like growing up in the U.S.
I was not really aware of any historical background. My grandparents came here at 2 and 3 years old. So there was never any foreign language spoken anywhere, and nobody was religious or observant. So the background had to be elicited from my parents. My father's family is actually Hungarian, and my mother's is Ukrainian and Turkish, but it didn't have any influence on us other than maybe liking borscht, Just, but in those days in New York, many of the New York Jewish population came from either Hungary or Ukraine or the Soviet Union, because they all left during the pogroms. They all left when the world turned against the Jews and they could come into this country long before Hitler. They came much earlier. I think my grandparents came here in the 1890s, something like that, a long time ago, before the world changed. So it's only more recently that historical ethnicity became relevant, because when everything blew up in Ukraine, it was, oh my goodness, we must have genetic relatives there. Just because I don't know who they are, clearly I have relatives there. And that was a very startling frightening reaction for me to suddenly realize, well, maybe we didn't lose anybody in the Holocaust because nobody was in Germany, but the Holocaust went well beyond Germany. And we were very fortunate to not have had the slaughter in our family that we were aware of. Very different.
Very sad. And my heart goes out to the Jewish community and the Ukrainian community, to all the war-torn zones around the world. I mean, Sudan, I mean, Haiti, we may not be, there's civil war at the moment between the more affluent class and the gangs because it's gone to a different level. But this is not a conversation. As a matter of fact, I am deliberately staying away from the discussion of Haiti at this time because I don't think I could keep myself composed on camera to discuss Haiti. So we'll focus on other lands. So did you set out, because I know that we have, because of now with technology, we have so many tools to trace our ancestries. Have you considered looking into ancestral.com, DNA testing to see who you match up with? Before we dive back in, it is a pleasure to tell you that my book, Sendra Inner Luxury, Unlock the Secret to Your Luxurious Self, now on Kindle and as well as on paperback. So feel free to rush and get a copy for your loved ones. In addition, if you are loving these extraordinary conversations about luxury, about balance, about emotional intelligence, about a little bit of politics, a little bit of spirituality, if you're loving all of it, well, rush to Amazon and get my book. You will learn emotional balance is from within. You will learn to elevate yourself to the frequency that you wish to express in the world. So there can be more love, more peace, more harmony. But there's more. You can rush to pre-order my next book, which is Sendra, Guide to Luxury Living and Emotional Balance. Well, for me, my brand is all about living from within, emotional balance, emotional intelligence, and luxury. And for me, these books are flowing endlessly from me to you with so much love. Let me know what you think. Let me know after you read it. Put a comment, put a review. I'd love to hear from you. I would be curious about that.
I have a cousin who is deeply invested in Ancestry.com. And every time she comes up with somebody new, she circulates it. I'm the oldest of three girls. I know you're the youngest of three, yes. Right? I'm the oldest of three. So she always circulates everything when she finds new names. But these names go back so far. Again, even my grandparents, came here as infants. So I don't really associate with, in that sense of family.
Connected. But I think it would be fascinating. But you may not do it, but it'll be interesting to see the future generation, because I think in this day that we're living in, people just want information, don't they?
Yeah.
Want information because I think it's because we're losing culture, and the United States has become truly a melting pot. Because, with social media and people traveling, the ease of travel, yeah. People are looking to explore other cultures. I think at some point we will be reminded that this culture that you started with is also just as important as the culture that you are going to explore. For me, I'm so grateful. I think I took it for granted because I was, in a family that was very patriotic. Even though I lived in this country, my parents always made sure I knew where I came from. I fought it, but they were like, in this house, the Haitian culture dominates. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then, of course, I had to deal with the acculturation of my friends, American friends would come in and say, why do you have this? Why do you have your Haitian flag in the house? And blah, blah, blah. But that said, culture itself is what is creating the future. So as I see how the world is unfolding at this time, even in the US, on college campuses, there is such a clash of different ideologies, right? So, I know you say you have children, and do they have children? Are they anyone on campus? Do you have any of your family? Nobody's
No, not on campus. But let me tell you, thank you for going there, because I wanted to mention this to you in terms of culture.
Mhm.
I have one son, and my son, as I described to you, is on my side Hungarian, Ukrainian, and Turkish.
Mhm.
On his father's side, he's Scotch Irish and Lutheran.
Mhm.
Then we get to the woman he married is half Chinese, and her father's from Indiana. So we have an Asian religion, I'm not sure which religion they have, plus Catholic, plus Lutheran, plus Jewish. And I have a 4-year-old grandson and a 1-year-old grandson. So they are really growing up in a multicultural, international, multilingual environment.
Correct. And that's what we're seeing unfold, because you may wonder why certain people resonate more with one. And I think it goes deeply in the DNA. Because sometimes, for me, for instance, I gravitated to the Buddhist meditation practice, even though I was raised in the Methodist church. I started wondering, why does this resonate with me so deeply? But I was already anchored in the Haitian culture. But I wanted to talk to you. So you didn't raise your children Jewish. You did not.
My son is Jewish by choice, by his choice.
Okay.
But he never, in order for me to do my job as a mother, I wanted him to understand how many religions there were in this world and how many different cultures. And just because I was Jewish and his dad was Lutheran didn't shut the door, which of course he proved when he married an Asian girl. So it was very important for him to be aware of multiculturalism, right from the beginning.
I think that's fantastic. Your grandchildren will be extremely beneficial, especially as we eventually will listen to this episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D, where you talk about this. And so let's go offshore a bit. So we have all these flare-ups across the world. People would ask me, what do you think? Because they come to me knowing that I'm a conflict management professional, and I'm going to ask you the same question. So what do you think? What do you think about Ukraine? So let's leave Israel, Palestine a bit. I've been studying Israel, Palestine since I went to graduate school 20 years ago. This was a conflict in my graduate program. And that's why I have kind of Israel, Gaza sort of fatigue. Because, and I say to people, you're just coming to this conversation. I've been having this conversation for like 20, 25 years. But you tell me, as you look at this conflict in Ukraine with Russia, some call it a war, I call it a conflict. All wars are conflicts. And so I think people like the feeling of escalation. They call things war, but let's bring it into perspective. It's a conflict. It's two very similar cultures having a dispute. Okay. Some people say, oh, you minimize it. It's a dispute on, you could say territory, borders, etc. But you give me your perspective, because some may not accept it from me, I have no skin in that game. I have no ancestry in that area. But for you, when you first heard about this, were there any triggers for you? What were you as a mediator, but also as someone who has that lineage, that connection to the lineage?
Multi-part question. Let me see if I can do it justice. For me, it's not really a two-sided dispute. There's a bully in the house, and the bully has decided to pick on one of the little guys, to pick on the Ukraine. Obviously, that's a political perspective. But with the breakup of the Soviet Union, some of the states wound up smaller than others. And of course, we know that Russia is the largest.
Sure.
And with an aggressive leader as Putin, he, in my mind, through my bias, with my apologies, sort of went shopping. And the Ukraine not only has incredible access to the Atlantic Ocean, is surrounded by wealthy countries, is symbolic of the free West, that looked like a good place for him to put into his top drawer. So I see it not as a conflict, but as a bully and the little guys attempting to defend themselves. But of course, we know that the US and many other countries are helping, supporting the Ukraine with money and munitions and personnel and all of that. And that's trying to equalize the input that Russia is using to be the aggressor.
Sure.
So we keep feeding and Russia keeps sending more money and troops, and the conflict has grown rather than subsided. They make some territorial ingress and then they lose it. And that goes for either side. They try to defend and they pull back. But if you're going to step back and look at the basic question and the basic rationale for doing this, that's a question that I'm not smart enough, I haven't researched enough to know why Putin actually chose the Ukraine, because he would have known that it would be defended by the West. There are other countries, let's say Bulgaria, which is considered to be the most backward of the former Soviet states, the most controlled. Why not go there? Well, I guess he already owns that one. So I don't understand the choice of the Ukraine, because he knew it was going to be the biggest pill to swallow.
Isn't that the red flag, though? Because I have followed it, and I am someone who is hesitant to say that this is purely by chance. I know there were agreements, so that's why I want to bring your mediator hat. I want you to put your mediator hat on. I know there were agreements. There were two agreements during the Obama years. There was a Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and Minsk, the city, is located in Belarus, which is, like a little satellite office of Russia. So there were, protectors of those agreements. We're looking at France and Germany. And so three parties signed, or two parties were, observers of this agreement. And then the executors were Russia and Ukraine. This is before Zelensky. Of course, Putin's been there forever. But I'm fascinated by this field of mediation, of international mediation, because that's the only way to bring world peace. And when I look at these two, I do remember early on that Putin was trying to make a point. Like, you're going to push me, I'm going to push back at that time. But I do remember someone, I think it was Zelensky, saying he was willing to negotiate and sit down. And I think there were a few meetings, but there haven't been any meetings in like a year and a half, And so I want to say, where do you think that? So I'm not saying that Russia was right in doing this. I'm just saying the process itself, because I'm a process-focused person. Where did we drop the ball? Because we were close at some point. I remember going to sleep one night and saying, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be an agreement. Because I know there was a delegation coming from Turkey, Russia, from Russia and from Ukraine. They went to Turkey. At some point, someone didn't show up. It's vague to me now, because there's so much more talk than action now, except on the actual ground. But I wanted to bring you back to how us mediators, how we can apply the same techniques in our local mediations that we do, whether it's a family mediation, whether it's a contractual dispute, whether it is a lawsuit, whatever it is, to the process of international mediation. So let me talk about the components. So we have two parties, right? Two parties, Russia and Ukraine, irrespective of the cheerleaders, because they each have cheerleaders, United States and Europe cheering on Zelensky. And then you have China and the surrounded Russia countries in the Baltics cheering on, for Russia. And we will just say the BRIC countries. So this no different than any other mediation, right? Because you have conducted mediations with people who bring a whole slew of cheerleaders, the fanboys and fangirls, whether they are labeled attorneys or, a family member supporting, whatever it is, there's always externally. But the bottom line is the two parties, Robin, are the ones that usually are engaged in the decision makers. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct. It's more than fair. It's absolutely correct. But let's talk about the agenda and motivation of parties in general, and then try to apply it to the world scene.
Okay.
All right. We know that people come into mediation front-loaded with emotion. I'm not going to pay a penny more. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to take a penny less. Nobody can push me around. They come front-loaded with all that emotional stuff. And it's the job of the mediator to help them put the emotional stuff in the backpack and start talking about getting that kitchen floor finished.
Sure.
All right. Or figuring out who's going to get mom's piano.
Bringing them down to earth.
You bring them down to earth with questions like I've said, what do you want and why do you want it? All right. But what we never know is the actual agenda of the people who are showing up to mediate. Sometimes people really want to get it fixed.
Right.
Sometimes people have no intention of getting it fixed.
Right.
Sometimes people say, I'll wait and see what happens. Sometimes people say, no matter what, I don't care what it costs. I'm going to see him, whatever. All right.
Right.
We don't know the agenda. We are seeing a performance. We're seeing a show. When somebody says, maybe that would work, we don't know what he's really thinking. Right. And that's the disconnect because we can't mind meld, and that's a problem. So when you talk about the real world and you apply it internationally, we similarly don't know what part is a show and what part is buying time. Very often in mediation, people will buy time, right? They'll agree to something and then have no intention of doing it just to buy time. All right. So we also see that in the big picture where we see people saying, yes, that might work. Yes, let's sit down and do it and have no intention of doing it, but maybe just buying time, maybe just getting some good reviews, if you will, in the world press. We just never know what's behind the curtain. And that to me is one of the greatest frustrations in looking at what's going on in the world, because we have even less information than we have in a small time mediation.
Correct. Because I do feel it's not very transparent. In one of the processes of one of the requirements of mediation is, or any negotiation, is transparency. Whether you're buying a house, I mean, you buy a house and the seller is not transparent about some of the damages that are existing. And then the person moves in, they're like, well, you lied to me. And so there you're escalating a process that could have been just resolved up front had you been just completely transparent. So I wanted to touch a little bit about when you think about, and I want to take you to this field of mediation and how I recognize, I mean, I went into the field of conflict analysis and resolution because I saw the need on the world stage. I really never had an interest on a local level. I remember doing my internship at the EEOC. I was mediating labor disputes and I was so bored. And I'll be, no offense, I was bored with EEOC because I was like, I'm ready to take on the world and bring world peace to here, one mind at a time. I actually had correspondent that one mind at a time. And so I remember, but also I felt that, there are enough people doing this at the local level. And so let me set my sights on the bigger picture, which is the global stage. And which is why I moved to London, to be honest. And then I realized, my goodness, nobody wants peace. No one wants peace. And I actually made a decision at that point. I'm going to remain the capitalist that I am and stay remain as a financier. So that said, looking at that stage again, so we're going to gravitate. We know there's no transparency between what's happening in Russia and what's happening in Ukraine. We know that mediation, I have this introduction, part of my introduction is to say, I firmly believe that every dispute can be resolved. I have no doubt. And I usually pause and add when there are two willing participants. That's what I always say. So Russia, I know at some point was willing. I know Ukraine at some point was willing. So I wonder what's like clogging the pipe at this point to get us from there, because I'm hearing there's going to be more escalation, but I know you're not well versed about the new turn of events with, I think Washington has said, go ahead and bomb them inside of Russia, and that's not going to end well. One of the requirements is transparency, and we seem to be escalating in the Russia. But then, simultaneously, on October 7th, there was a new where we literally had to turn our heads. We were here, and then we literally had, and for those people who are listening to the podcast, I literally turned my head to turn right because I don't know, is that the right position where Gaza is? But so now we're being distracted again. So we got to wonder, is Ukraine distracting us from Gaza, or is Gaza the distraction to Ukraine? Don't know. So talk to me about, again, I said the Palestinian-Israeli conflict was something I was in when I was in graduate school. I said this has all these conflicts with all the historical, context. I wasn't well informed enough, even in graduate school. It just went down so deep, and I was just like, I'm just going to move on. But we're back to that. So, Robin, tell me, knowing what you know, the superficial, because I know you're not an expert, but just like me, not an expert, but interested. And because my interest is looking at this, it's just like a doctor who's a surgeon who's just learning how to, people treat cancer, right? So we're not the professionals in those specific areas, but curious. What's happening? Why are we creating? So let's talk a little bit about Gaza and Israel for a moment. Tell me on the superficial level what you think, what you see.
Yeah. Let me start by going back to Ukraine for a second.
Okay.
The Ukraine argument is about geography. It's about getting that access that can only come by reincorporating the Ukraine back as part of Russia, no more Soviet Union. But it was about geography, and it's about access, the free waterway, the Atlantic Ocean and all of that. Well, the Arab-Israeli conflict, Arab-Palestine-Israeli, all of that is also about geography.
Mm-hmm.
But it's geography in a different sense. They're fighting over both the actual existence of the state of Israel, which was agreed to as a sand pile, no access to water. We all know, right? It was almost like being given the hole in the middle of the donut, right? Because there's no water, nothing else. And thousands of years of religious controversy,
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because they're fighting over religion and they're fighting over land.
Yeah.
And much of that is purely emotional.
It is.
It's our land. It's your land. It was ours first. You took the name. And yet it's interesting because it's still one God, whatever name you want to give him,
right.
and one history. And yet they're fighting. And that's a perfect example of being front loaded with emotion, because solutions have to be practical and factual and strategic. And they can't get out of it's mine because, and it's all that emotional stuff. So you see this cognitive dissonance, right? To use a psychological phrase, where people are arguing one thing, but they're not even getting to the heart of the matter.
Well,
it's such distance.
Getting to the root cause of it.
They don't want to face the root cause of it. They don't want to have to say, all right, Israel can have this part, or the Palestinians. The two-state solution, most of the world figures is the right way to go, right? And yet there's so much resistance to it, you have to ask why. And that goes back.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
That goes back to the emotion. It's because, it's not because of the access to water or because of it's just, because it's like a parent saying, because I say so. They're just burning rubber. They're not making any progress at all.
Absolutely. It's like the hamster on the wheel. And
yeah,
I wanted to, so these two are dominant, but there are many around the world. There are so many around the world. Going back to what Putin has been talking about, what his main objective is for Ukraine is denazification. I never heard that term before. I actually didn't pay attention. I go about the world not thinking about Nazis, but here we are. So apparently that's his focus. And we know he had a significant, the USSR had a significant role to play in the wars. And they're saying that this was never, completely destroyed. So that's one of the things. But I understand there's still some of those individuals who have that ideology in Ukraine. And I think we're doing a disservice to the world when we pick and choose what we talk about when they talk about conflicts. Because if that's an issue, and I've not been there, I haven't met these people with certain emblems tattooed on their arm or worshiping in a particular way, reading history in a different way than I read it. To them, it's a plus. To me, it's a negative. The Jewish people have it. What I care about, though, are the facts, right? If that's what Russia is saying is an issue, why not? Because if it's a risk to Russia, it's a risk to me myself. Because look at me. If I went to Ukraine, that person comes across me, I don't think I'm going to be a bestie to them. So if that's an issue, why are we sort of ignoring the facts? And that's one of the things. And that's also what you talk about Gaza and Palestine. Why are we not having the courage to put some of these facts on the table, because it takes courage. A mediator has to be the adult in the room to say, I know you don't want to talk about this, but here we are, right? And go ahead. So it's just like when there are, the more sensitive cases or the family cases, I can imagine. There are some things that you just, emotional component of the conversation. I know he left you for another woman. I know you don't want to talk about that, but that's something you have to factor, because he wants a quick divorce, whatever the component is that's hindering from getting to a middle, an agreement. Talk to me about, why are we so adamant about not really looking at the monster in the room? Why are we in denial?
At least 10 years ago, I forget if it's Admiral Zinni, Zinni, or General Zinni, forgive me, I forget his rank, was sent by this country as a mediator. And he had actually trained as a mediator to go into the Arab-Israeli conflict and to get everybody to sit down with the rationality and the intelligence and the background, right? So they sat down, they had meetings. The Zinni had put a proposal on the table. This is all documented in a book. If you're interested, I can get it for you. I don't remember the name of it right now.
Okay.
Zinni laid out 10 or 12 points that had been, as I had said earlier, the jigsaw puzzle pieces on the table, and was suggesting that if they would give him some feedback, then maybe they could organize things and come out with a plan, which was beautifully rational, a wonderful thing for a mediator to do. And the parties, both sides, started arguing over the choice of words. That was a sham argument. Now, we know two different languages may translate or understand the word, any word, indifferently, right? I mean, you know that the word, let's say, angry, can be translated into 20 different words in different languages and have slightly different meanings. So both sides decided they didn't want to solve the problem, essentially. They wanted to keep arguing. So instead of saying, I don't understand what this means, or can you help me understand that? They said no because of that word and no because of that word. In other words, they were not ready to even listen to a rational argument. And that once again goes back to the agenda of what they really want to do and why they want to do it. And that we don't have access to. Putin moved thousands of Russians into the Ukraine and then had a vote about whether they wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. So he staged that. And then the vote came out, yes, we want to be part of the Soviet Union. But
was that what happened? Was he staged, or was he originally from that area?
The people who, over the years, the people who wanted to be in this, because the border was open, right? The people who wanted to be in Russia would go to Russia, and the people who wanted to stay in the Ukraine would stay in the Ukraine. But supposedly it was, again, I can't verify about it.
We're just talking.
So people were moved into Russia for the purpose of the vote. There are essentially no living Nazis anymore because World War II was so long ago. The neo-Nazi movement in this country, can't talk about there, is being funded. When you see matching ball caps and matching T-shirts and matching banners, you know, somebody is paying for that disruption.
Like a boy band.
Like a boy band, yes. That is definitely what was happening on the campuses. The FBI had identified the outside agitators, one campus after the other, who were providing the T-shirts and the ball caps, both metaphorical and actual. I would not be surprised if that was what was happening in the Ukraine now as well.
Really? So you don't think there are organic members of the Ukrainian military are actually there holding, like the Nazi signs? Apparently, the ex-prime minister of Britain went there, Boris Johnson. He's such a character. And he was holding the Nazi Ukrainian flag, apparently, just recently. It was 2 weeks ago. I'll have to put that on the screen when there's an article about him, about showing that.
Boris Johnson is a character, but now with AI, fake.
Sure.
One of the, just total little bubble segue. one of the new uses they have announced for AI that I'm totally in favor of is they're going to use AI to determine whether photographs and soundtracks were the result of AI or actual photographs.
So, well, let me
Which
get
is-
this straight. It's like AI is going to be double checking itself. So who do
Yes.
I trust? Can I trust AI to say that, yes, this is and no, this is not?
Well,
Is that going to be possible?
AI is lacking 100% transparency,
Yes,
right?
it is.
Nobody knows the algorithms
Right.
and nobody's going to share them.
Right.
But the existence of photographs such as you've just described,
Mhm.
Boris Johnson holding something, suggests to me that maybe it really isn't what it purports to be.
I'll find the article. It's an article in the Hindustan Times that came up. There was an article that was published in India. And so I'll find the article with him holding the flag, but it isn't authentic. It's been authenticated, but he's a buffoon. So let's just say he is someone who should have never been in that role because he's a child. He is a child. You know, I talked about emotional intelligence in one of my previous podcasts,
Yeah.
and he has none. So that emotional intelligence comes with maturity. And some of these leaders, and I'm just appalled at what we're seeing now on the world stage. What happened to like the true leaders? Now we're seeing like it's like a playground. But
Like
I'm
a
gonna leave
playground.
that aside for now. So again, it was published and I saw it. I think it was on our newspaper republished something that was published in India. So, but I'll post it for the audience while after this video is published. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about on the topic of leaders. Yeah. So because again, there was a time, Robin, where America was the adult in the room, where we put out fires around the world. I'm getting the feeling that we are igniting fires around the world now. I mean, that's the sense I have. So what's your thought about that? And I thought our role as mediators is to help extinguish these fires. Wouldn't you say? Is it because that we have too many lawyers, present company accepted, of course, in politics and not enough mediators? When I say that, it's, mediator doesn't mean that anyone with a certification
Right.
is an official mediator. I'm talking about a mindset, someone who's about resolving conflicts and not creating conflict. People who are builders and not destroyers, because when you have more conflicts, you are definitely destroying. There is not a place in the world where there is not a dispute or conflict that's not going to be destroyed. But when you think about building, something or, building, because you have a mindset of the children, the generation after me, I want them to have more than what I had. That's
Right.
the mindset of a mediator. You want to bring
Yes.
consensus. So tell me,
Yeah.
what do you think? What is the solution? Do we need more mediators in politics? I mean, more people with the mindset of resolution, of conflict management?
What we need is people who listen to one another. We have lots of people who pontificate, who shoot off their mouths, which I guess is a more vulgar way of saying pontificate.
I know
But
you don't like
everybody's now, let's get to the lawyers for a second. Everybody has heard the cliche that the lawyer is supposed to represent their client zealously,
Mhm.
right? That has never been intended to mean lie for your client, pull out all the stops for your client, call the other side nasty names. It has only meant do the best you can to get the client what the client wants that can be reasonably accomplished within the law. Okay. It
Understood.
has to be reasonable. When we saw people like, I don't want to get specific. We have
Talk
seen,
about Donald Trump. You could say his name.
well, I want to talk about Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
This is Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. I would be lying. I would be misrepresenting in the title if you were editing yourself. Please speak freely.
All right. When we saw Rudy Giuliani knowingly standing there and saying things that were wrong, impossible, with the hair dye dripping down on his face.
You're talking about the election disputes.
It's the election dispute.
Mhm.
He knew better. He thought that he had to be all in. He had to be absolutely carry the sword, carry the flag. He forgot that as a lawyer, it has to function within the law, within reasonable bounds, with dignity and respect, not just to the end of the earth, right? And I think now he's been disbarred and all of that. So that didn't work really well for him. I think so. We'll have to verify that, but I think so. Or either that or it's pending. But the point really is, if the lawyer's agenda is to do everything possible to accomplish the client's goals, we're not going to see listening. We're not going to, I guess we're not going to hear listening. We're not going to see progress because that position never gets to any kind of modification. Remember, when there's a dispute, at the beginning of the dispute, people are as far away as they're going to be. They're not going to get any farther apart. And the whole point of mediation is to put new information on the table so somebody can, without losing face, say, oh, I didn't know that, or maybe that would work, or I'd be willing to do that if. We have to move toward a mutually acceptable position.
Mm-hmm.
But when the lawyer is there saying, only this, only this, only this, only this, he's not listening, and he has in his agenda, he is not going to make any move. He's going to force that into an impasse, right?
Understood.
So then you have that kind of lawyer. The second kind of lawyer puts his own agenda, forgive my choice of pronoun, it could be her own agenda too, but puts her agenda in front of the client's. The attorney wants to make more money. The attorney doesn't want to give back a retainer. The attorney wants to see the headlines. There is an inherent conflict of interest between the attorney and the client. So that's a second problem with the attorneys who choose not to listen for their own interest rather than for the client's interest.
No, I fully understand. So I'm going to push back a little bit as far as, the attorney, because sometimes the client will be the one to understand, to have a deeper understanding of the situation. But, specifically, you're speaking about the election interference or election dispute. It was a dispute, election dispute as to the outcome, the results of the election. Well, I believe what Giuliani was doing is asking for a recount. And he was, of course, he's an extravagant, he's another character. He's just like Bojo. These people are very sort of eccentric. So there's a lot of hubris there. And I do like Giuliani. I mean, with 9/11, he stepped up. But I do want to say that some of these people are all, showmen. So, and he was representing Donald Trump, who's also someone who has a very eccentric personality. But in that instance, I want to say that, wouldn't it be okay, though, if you have been retained by a client to represent you, whether it be in court or in the public eye, to bring forth the best argument possible in defense of your client, which I think is what he was doing for Donald Trump. So I think at that point, he was doing just his job. And I think his personality just added to it, right? So go ahead.
It all depends upon when in the timeline particular positions, when he took particular positions.
Mm-hmm.
The lawsuits challenging the election, 47 out of 47 were thrown out. I mean, there was no legal basis, and he continued to make the argument that there was something wrong with the election. Mm-hmm. Given that courts all over the country said no, at some point, he needs to stop making that argument because it's not getting any traction, So he needs
Absolutely.
to talk to his client to rephrase it, to reframe it, to make some progress. Because to keep making that argument might satisfy the client, but there's no likelihood of that succeeding.
Right. No, it just reminded me of a movie or an series that I was watching. It was a true life story, and this person was he was a murderer, and he was making sure that everyone knew he was innocent. Until the end, he was saying he's innocent. And it happened in the UK, actually. It's something that happened in 1985. I think he killed his family. But till this day, he's arguing he is innocent. I'm the type of person, when I watch something and they say it's a true story, I do my own investigation and I go after the movie. I'm watching all the clips, all the interviews. Until this day, he's actually said that he's innocent. So that's the same. Some people, who is your best advocate? It's yourself. But if you do have, and now there are people representing him who are coming forth. He served 38 years of stating he's innocent. and he's in there like for a lifetime. They don't have the death penalty in the UK. I'm not saying I'm for the death penalty. I'm just saying in the US probably it would have been different. But his legal representatives are now saying that continuing to say he's innocent. So isn't it in fairness to the client? And we're talking about the dispute with the elections and the fact that Giuliani and all the entourage of Donald Trump. And I'm very transparent. So I tell people, I didn't vote for Donald Trump the first time. I voted for him the second time. And because of my mediator mindset, he's the first president in my lifetime who didn't bomb anyone. So, I voted for Obama, and Obama bombed 7 countries. And that's really where I stand. I love Barack Obama. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, change and everything. And I was like, but you killed Gaddafi. So that's my thing. When I come into a situation, and you always have to win my vote from the mindset of a mediator, because on the world stage, what's good for one, and I quoted on that last podcast, the same as Marcus Aurelius, who says, what's good for the bee is good for the hive. Right?
Listen to that podcast. It was excellent. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I skipped that course. I was like, that's it. But isn't that true though? So when we think about why we vote for people, and I think, and I'm not defending Donald Trump nor Giuliani, I'm trying to stay in process with you. Help me understand at what point in politics, when we have, because you and I are talking about how mediation can help these politicians be more effective. What would be the difference between an attorney representing or someone who's a mediator? Right? It would be a very different outcome if you were hired as a mediator in such a situation. And I know you don't like talking politics, but you can't avoid it with me. Can't. So what would be your approach to such scenario? And I know this is a very polarized, this is the type of situation that people stop talking to their family members about. How would you as a mediator approach that to ensure that there can be balance in a conversation about such a topic? You just take a deep breath and don't think about Giuliani or Trump. Think about the process itself.
Yes. One of the things the mediator can do is let people talk freely and then accumulate, just as General Zinni did, accumulate a list of suggestions that were put on the table, opinions that were put on the table by both sides. And you're not going to say, you suggested this, and then you suggested that. It's what I say in mediation is, this is what I've heard. I've heard 8 different suggestions, and I'll just go through them, right? And then I'll say, where do you want to start? Which one would you like to talk about first? In other words, neutralizing what you and I know as reframing. Okay.
Yes.
We neutralize it by creating a combined list of points for discussion, possible solutions, whatever it is. So I, as the neutral and impartial, can assemble the collected wisdom without pointing fingers. That would be one thing I would try. But you've always got to remember that clients, regardless of who they are, lie to their attorneys. They only tell the attorneys the good stuff. Never mind politics, but they only tell the attorneys what they want them to know, right?
Right.
How much of that is the whole story? Is it 60%, 70%, 20%? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
So we have to understand that the parties are never 100% truthful. Mm-hmm. There are very few clients who will say, this is the whole story. Let me tell you, and then you can deal with it. They're going to say, this is the story, and they're going to dictate to the attorney, right? So the attorney has to be the spokesperson based on what the attorney knows is partial information, some of which may be incorrect. But that's where the mediator has access, has ingress, can make a point, because I can say when somebody says that, all right, I'll give you an example. I did a mediation it was labor and employment. The employee's dad was dying and then eventually died. There was an employment contract, right? The employee had only been there 19 days out of the last 90. And the employee said, but my father was dying. It was a very hard time for me. And the employer said, but you have a contract. All right. So empathy on the one side, documentation on the other. We had to figure out a way that they could reach an agreement. The employee was terminated for breach of contract. But it's all about what she told her attorney
Mhm.
And what her attorney was able to put on the table when the attorney said, really? It was only 19 days out of 90? The attorney learned something. And at that point, the attorney had to
Right.
figure it out. All right. That's what we need. We need the evolution of information to be heard, to be shared.
Sure.
All right. So when the employer said only 19 out of 90, then the attorney could turn to the client and say, rather than saying, no, that's not correct, or no, it doesn't matter, it does matter. And it was correct.
Mhm.
Right. That's how we can make progress, but only if people are willing to listen, and only if the attorneys are willing to talk to their clients just to make adjustments, just tweaks, tighten it a little bit, loosen it a little bit. It isn't throw it out. That's where things have to be in mediation. And that's where we'd like to see them in the world stage.
Absolutely. I'd like to have someone inspire me today. I mean, I have to say that, you know, I feel more secure in my own life sometimes, at times when I see on the world stage, we have great, leaders that have command of a situation. I can't say I see any of that happening right now because I feel like, I don't know, it's just very insecure. And I'm sure the audience can understand what I'm feeling at this time, especially being 2024 and all the turbulence that is happening just alone in the United States. We may not be a war, but again, I mentioned earlier, there are families who are disrupted because of the politics, what's happening in the world, with what's happening in the United States with political parties, what's happening in Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Israel, all of that. So on that note, what can you give the audience some tips on when they're dealing with disputes and conflicts within their own families, within their own communities? Give some practical tips that, just to wrap up the video. What you suggest? Before we dive back in, it is a pleasure to tell you that my book, Sendra Inner Luxury, Unlock the Secret to Your Luxurious Self, now on Kindle and as well as on paperback. So feel free to rush and get a copy for your loved ones. In addition, if you are loving these extraordinary conversations about luxury, about balance, about emotional intelligence, about a little bit of politics, a little bit of spirituality, if you're loving all of it, well, rush to Amazon and get my book. You will learn emotional balance is from within. You will learn to elevate yourself to the frequency that you wish to express in the world. So there can be more love, more peace, more harmony. But there's more. You can rush to pre-order my next book, which is Sendra, Guide to Luxury Living and Emotional Balance. Well, for me, my brand is all about living from within, emotional balance, emotional intelligence, and luxury. And for me, these books are flowing endlessly from me to you with so much love. Let me know what you think. Let me know after you read it. Put a comment, put a review. I'd love to hear from you.
One of the things I would suggest is using a mediator, and we sort of touched on this a little bit before, but not on the tape. Using a mediator from within the community, a mediator who may understand where that dispute comes from and where it might go. There are family disputes that are totally random. I don't like the job you chose, totally random, but I don't like the man you want to marry. Then that's a different story. And that might be handled better by somebody from within the community. So it's very important on how you choose a mediator. All right. And if you are working with a lawyer, if it goes that far, whether or not there's a lawsuit, make sure that you as a party have a voice in choosing that mediator, not just somebody that the lawyer thinks would be good. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's make sure the parties remain involved and powerful in the mediation process to get it solved.
Well, I nominate you for president, Robin. I think I will run your campaign. I will make sure you win. We need a sound voice in Washington. You're already in Washington. All you have to do is change your address, Pennsylvania Avenue. Are you up for the job?
It's a little short notice for November. We'll talk about it for 4 years. I love you. Thank you so much. That's very sweet. That's very sweet.
Yes, because we need strong, powerful, straightforward, no nonsense, but clear thinking people and, leading us, so that we can be an example in our own and inspired in our own communities. And I think mediation needs to be more widespread. And on that note, I want to say again, thank you for joining me, Ms. Shaw, on this episode. And it's been such a delight. I am giving you an open invitation to come back and share
Thank you.
your wisdom. And I want to ask you, do you have any final thoughts before you share how people can reach you?
No, I think we've covered it all. And I think I gave my summary just a moment ago. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Of course. Can you give us the email, the contact information? Are you on social media?
Yes and no. I'm redoing LinkedIn, and there is an old Facebook. So let's just stick to the website. I own the mediation training group. That website is mediationtraining.group. And my email address is Robin, ROBIN, @ladymediator.net.
Yes. And who would not want to be in touch with the Lady Mediator? So again, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we wish you wherever you are, a peaceful day. Thanks so much, Robin.
Thank you so much, Sendra. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to Frankly Speaking with Sendra D's podcast and join us every week as we uncover the stories of those who triumphed over life-altering challenges to achieve not just financial success, but a richer, a deeper, a more altruistic life. It's about time we redefine what it means to be a truly affluent individual. Don't you agree? So come and join me. And let's be unstoppable on this journey called life. Because here, I to waking up to your authentic being.